Me cabe el honor de presentar al profesor David Patterson. David Patterson es profesor de literatura y de historia. Ocupa la cátedra Hillel Feinberg para estudios sobre el Holocausto. Es miembro de la Unión Mundial de Estudios Judíos y también de la Asociación para los Estudios Judíos. El profesor Patterson ha dado muchísimas conferencias en universidades y en organizaciones y comunidades del mundo entero. Es consultor para varias organizaciones a nivel nacional y entre ellas destacaría el Centro para los Estudios del Holocausto y el Genocidio de Filadelfia, y también ha participado en el simposio Weinstein sobre el Holocausto. También ha sido el coeditor de la serie sobre los estudios del post-Holocausto que fueron publicados por la University of Washington Press. También es el ganador del National Jewish Book y también del Correct Jewish Book. El profesor Patterson ha publicado más de 30 libros y más de 140 artículos en periódicos y libros sobre filosofía, literatura, judaísmo, holocausto y educación. Ha sido el profesor Patterson también editor y traductor de la edición inglesa de The Complete Black Book of Russian Jewry. Y también es uno de los mayores contribuyentes y coeditor de la enciclopedia sobre la literatura del Holocausto en el 2002 y también del libro Fire in the Ashes, Fuego en las cenizas, y también Dios, el mal y el Holocausto, y también sobre otro libro llamado Afterwards, Post-Holocaust Struggles with Forgiveness, Reconciliation and Justice. Y también ha traducido los estudios literarios o los trabajos literarios de Iván Turgenev, de Dostoyevsky y de Tolstoy. Y el libro más reciente del profesor Patterson es El genocidio en el pensamiento judío, publicado en el 2012. Y además, por último, el profesor Patterson es doctor por la Universidad de Oregón. Profesor,
Thank you.
the floor is yours.
Thank you. I want to begin with a few words of thanks to Professor Torrens, to Mr. Kerub, to the Baruch Spinoza Foundation, Mr. Scher, the translator, Mr. Calderon, others who have been very gracious toward me. We've had an excellent beginning this morning. I hope you have seen the exhibit outside the hall here. It's a good introduction to my remarks today on jihadist Islam, jihadist Islamism, and the legacy of Nazi anti-Semitism. The last words to come from the hand of Adolf Hitler as he was preparing his last political testament prior to his suicide on April 30th, 1945, consisted of a plea to humanity to continue to resist mercilessly, he said, the poisoner of all nations, international Jewry. Now, many groups have heeded the call of Adolf Hitler to resist mercilessly the poisoner of all nations, international Jewry. There are at least 80 neo-Nazi and Nazi groups, like the Aryan nations in North America, the Nationalist Front in the UK, Pamyat in Russia, the International Storm Front, many others. However, the most systematic, the most pervasive, and most violent response to the call of the Führer has come from Islamic jihadists. No other groups bent on the extermination of the Jews are so heavily armed or so generously funded, often by state governments. And this is no accident. The association between National Socialism and Islamic jihadism goes back to the inception of the Muslim Brotherhood in March of 1928, founded by Hassan al-Banna. The slogan, the motto, or the creed, the credo of the Brotherhood is Allah is our object, the Prophet is our leader, the Quran is our law, jihad is our way, and dying in the way of Allah is our highest hope. This continues to be the credo of the Muslim Brotherhood. Hassan al-Banna often expressed his admiration for Adolf Hitler. Al-Banna learned a great deal, he said, for example, about propaganda from Hitler. The aim of propaganda, as Hitler described it, was not to inform or even to persuade. The aim of propaganda, Hitler explained, is to incite what he called wrathful hatred. The Muslim Brotherhood had a propaganda committee established and in place by 1935. They went into operation, they went to work with the coming of the Arab revolt in Palestine in 1936, launching a propaganda campaign that extolled the Nazis and that was strongly supporting the Arab revolt, which had been incited by Haj Amin al-Husseini, the Mufti of Jerusalem. The Brotherhood had made contact with al-Husseini as early as 1929, when the brother of Hassan al-Banna, Abd al-Rahman al-Banna, went to Palestine to meet with Haj Amin al-Husseini. 1929 was also a year of rioting in Hebron and other places in Palestine at the time, also incited by Haj Amin al-Husseini. Al-Husseini would prove to be a pivotal link between Islamic jihadism and National Socialism, as we shall see. In fact, there are two lines of development here that touch each other at certain points and finally converge. It's the line of development of the Muslim Brotherhood and the career, the jihadist career of Haj Amin al-Husseini. So that, you know, by the end of the war, in November 1945, the center of a systematic ideological anti-Semitism had shifted from Germany to the Arab world. In Egypt, in November of 1945, on the anniversary of the Balfour Declaration, the British mandate assurances to the Zionists at the end of the First World War that there would be a haven for the Jews in Palestine, the Balfour Declaration. At the instigation of the Brotherhood, demonstrators rampaged the Jewish quarters of Cairo. They plundered houses and shops, attacked non-Muslims, devastated and burned, set fire to, synagogues. The scholar Matthias Kunzel points out, as he looks at this incident, that the Brotherhood was inspired not by the Nasserism of the 60s, but by the European fascism of the 1930s. Their campaigns prior to 1951 were not anti-colonialist, they were anti-Jewish. So anti-Semitism forms a foundational element in the worldview of the Muslim Brotherhood almost from its inception, if not from its inception. What would become modern Islamic jihadism then is a hybrid of this development in Islam, represented by the Brotherhood in its early years, and National Socialism. In both cases, anti-Semitism is a fundamental defining feature of the worldview. Just as you could not be a Nazi without being an anti-Semite, you could not be a jihadist without being an anti-Semite. To abandon your anti-Semitism would require abandoning either your Nazism or your jihadism. There are a number of similarities between the Muslim Brotherhood's ideology and Nazi thinking, and they were very conscious of this. For example, the Führerprinzip, the leadership principle. Matthias Kunzel, again, explains that tightly organized around the leadership principle, the Brotherhood demanded the dissolution of all parties and the abolition of parliamentary democracy in favor of an organic state based on Sharia law. Kunzel has further demonstrated that the history of the Muslim Brothers shows that revolutionary anti-Semitism is no mere supplementary feature of modern jihadism, it is its core. Now, in the statement, the term modern is crucial. Islamic jihadism is a distinctly modern phenomenon, seems to me. It's not a throwback. It's modern in as much as it draws upon modern anti-Semitic images and canards imported largely from Europe. For example, from the Nazis, you find an echo of the Nazi cry of Ein Volk, ein Reich, ein Führer. There's a parallel slogan or parallel thinking in jihadism where you see the aim of the jihadists is to create one caliphate ruled by Sharia with one people under one leader. Here the folk consists of the Ummah, that is the Muslims of the world. The Reich is the caliphate under which Sharia rules every aspect of life, both personal and public, private and public. And the one leader is al-Murshid, the supreme guide of the Muslim Brotherhood. During the Arab Revolt of 1936 to 1939 in Palestine, and during which time, as I said, the Brotherhood undertook an elaborate propaganda campaign, their membership grew from 800 to 2,000. Christina Harris points out that this conflict gave Hassan al-Banna the unexpected opportunity for expansion. His loyalty earned him the warm commendation of the powerful Mufti of Jerusalem, Haj Amin al-Husseini, who at the time relied heavily on Nazi financing to fund the Arab Revolt. It's also worth pointing out that in 1937, in the midst of the Arab Revolt, Ruhollah Khomeini traveled to Egypt to study with the Muslim Brothers. The man who would become the Ayatollah Khomeini had his ideological training at the feet of the Muslim Brothers. So you see the Islamic Republic of Iran is one of the many, many, many jihadist offshoots of the Muslim Brotherhood. In April and May of 1938, to follow further the development of the Brotherhood, the activities in Egypt, they led violent demonstrations against the Jews of Egypt. The Nazi journalist Giselher Wirsing applauded these attacks, and he applauded the return to the religious traditions of Islam in Egypt, a tradition that, as Wirsing understood it, included Jew hatred. In October of 1938, a month before the infamous Kristallnacht in Germany that's been referred to already today, the Muslim Brotherhood organized the Parliamentary Conference for Arab and Muslim countries in Cairo. At that conference, they distributed copies of Arabic language translations of Mein Kampf, that is, portions of Mein Kampf, not the entire volume, but portions of Mein Kampf were distributed along with the protocols of the Elders of Zion, which appeared in Arabic in 1926. The Protocols of the Elders of Zion, of course, is the infamous forgery, first published in Russia in 1903, supposedly of the secret meeting of Jewish leaders plotting to take over and rule the world. That same year, 1938, Haj Amin al-Husseini, at the instigation of the Brotherhood, began to systematically eliminate his rivals in the Arab world, primarily from the Nashashibi clan. The Nashashibis, for example, had supported the recommendation of the British Peel Commission. In 1936, the British were trying to figure out a way to resolve the unrest in Palestine. They assigned the Peel Commission to that task, and the Peel Commission recommended a partition, two-state solution. The Jews accepted it, and the Arabs generally rejected it, with the exception of the Nashashibis. The Brotherhood labeled the Nashashibis as enemies who must be eliminated in the name of God. And this is to note that in the jihadist world, there are other Muslims to be counted among their enemies. Once the war broke out, the Brotherhood became even more supportive of the Nazi aims. There were Egyptian figures, Egyptian leaders, who were actively supporting the Nazis. Among those were Anwar Sadat and General Aziz al-Mirsi. Anwar Sadat, who would later be part of a peace agreement between Egypt and Israel, was arrested by the British as a Nazi spy. Meanwhile, the Brotherhood is continuing its activities. They're organizing what's known as their secret apparatus, the Al-Jihaz al-Siri, which functioned within the Brotherhood sphere, much like the Gestapo in Germany. Like the Nazis, they considered the communists to be one of their primary enemies, and they considered the communists to be primarily Jews. The Bolsheviks and the Jews were thrown into one category. Perhaps most importantly, like the Nazis, the Brotherhood by this time had viewed the Jew not as the other. The other is a human being, a strange human being, but a human being. The other here is not the Jew. The Jew is not the other. The Jew is evil incarnate, whatever form evil might assume. The capitalist, the communist, the racist, the colonialist, the perpetrator of apartheid, the violator of human rights, whatever the going evil of the day might be, gets tagged to the Jews. When the war ended in 1945, Haj Amin al-Husseini was wanted as a war criminal. And when he showed up in Egypt on 20th of June, 1946, he received a hero's welcome led by the Muslim Brotherhood. And it's at this point that the Brotherhood and al-Husseini take on a more formal and more solid relationship. The Muslim Brothers paved the way for a second career for the former Mufti of Jerusalem. So what about the Mufti of Jerusalem? Okay, we have an idea of some of the developments of the Muslim Brotherhood as from the 1920s, 30s, and 40s. There's a parallel development in the career of Haj Amin al-Husseini. Al-Husseini, who had fought with the Turks in the First World War, who had been in the regions where the Armenian genocide was carried out. His involvement in the Armenian genocide is unclear, but he was in the area where those actions took place. He was appointed Mufti of Jerusalem by Herbert Samuel, the head of the British Mandate at the time, on the 8th of May, 1921. The Mufti, among his first acts, would declare a jihad against the British and the Jews. 2 months after Hitler's appointment as chancellor on January 30th, 1933, on the 31st of March, 1933, al-Husseini had his first meeting with the German consul Heinrich Wolf in Jerusalem. Heinrich Wolf telegrammed back to Berlin the following. He said, "Today the Mufti gave me assurances that the Muslims both within and outside of Palestine send greetings to the new regime in Germany, and they hope to see the spread of fascism and anti-democratic leadership in other lands. The current Jewish influence on the economy and politics is harmful and must be fought everywhere." So wrote Heinrich Wolf. Bernard Lewis, a noted scholar of Jews in Arab lands, notes that the immediate aim of the Mufti was to put a stop to the Jewish settlement of Palestine. Beyond that, however, says Bernard Lewis, he aimed at a much vaster purpose, conceived not so much in pan-Arab as in pan-Islamic terms, for a holy war of Islam in alliance with Germany against world Jewry, to accomplish the final solution to the Jewish problem everywhere. And as I said, the Mufti's early overtures to the Nazis paid off with Nazi support of the Arab revolt in Palestine. Now that revolt took place against the background of swastikas, Arab language leaflets promoting the Nazis in Palestine, Arab teens forming groups as similar to the Nazi scouts imitating Hitler Youth, Arab children greeting each other with the Nazi salute, flags with swastikas in Arab areas in Palestine were to be seen. The Nazis, of course, welcomed this support and this show of support, and so that early on in the process of the revolt in June of 1936, the German Foreign Ministry, led by Vico von Bülow-Schwante, informed the German embassy in Cairo that the Nuremberg race laws pertained only to the Jews and not to the Arabs. In fact, there were other Nazi scholars who were apologists for Islam and for the Arabs in Germany, making a distinction between Arabs and Jews along, the Semitic lines. In October of 1937, Adolf Eichmann and Herbert Hagen visited Palestine. Haj Amin al-Husseini had a meeting with Eichmann, and this is just before al-Husseini had to flee Palestine, as he was wanted for inciting the Arab revolt. However, Eichmann himself wrote, quote, glowingly of the national and racial conscience that he observed among the Arabs. Eichmann reported that Nazi flags were flying in Palestine, adorning the houses with swastikas and portraits of Hitler. Soon after the outbreak of the war, in October 1939, al-Husseini had set up his base of operations in Baghdad. By this time, he was regularly on the Nazi payroll, and he was doing Arabic language propaganda broadcasts, radio broadcasts for the Nazis. In a letter to Hitler dated 20th January 1940, al-Husseini gave Hitler his assurances that the Arabs had deep sympathy for the Axis states and were ready to rise against their common enemy, that is, the Jews, and to continue the well-deserved feat of the Anglo-Jewish coalition. In June of that year, he sent another letter to Franz von Papen, the foreign minister in Turkey, assuring him of the Palestinian and the general Muslim support for the fight against international Jewry. Most importantly, perhaps during his stay in Baghdad, most important was the uprising to overthrow the Iraqi government, the Iraqi government, which was actually an arm of the British government at the time. The Nazis had coordinated with al-Husseini this uprising. It was to be a sort of a Nazi Iraqi state that was established. Al-Husseini was instrumental in that uprising. The uprising was led by Rashid Ali al-Gailani. The uprising lasted from the 3rd of April to mid-May of 1941. This was just as the Nazis were preparing to invade Russia and the Soviet Union, and just before the Holocaust itself, the extermination operation officially was underway. When the British suppressed the coup in Iraq by the end of May, Haj Amin al-Husseini prepared to leave for Tehran in Iran, but not before he incited what's known now as the Farhud. The Farhud was a riot against the Jews of Baghdad in which more than 600 Jews were murdered. So leaving this trail of Jewish blood behind him, al-Husseini made his way to Iran. From Iran, he went to Rome, from Rome, finally to Berlin. He had his first meeting with Adolf Hitler on the 28th of June, 1941. On that day, he recorded in his diary Hitler's avowal of the war against the Jews and his insistence that the Nazis and Arabs are engaged in the same struggle to exterminate the Jews. Now, according to the war crimes testimony of Adolf Eichmann's deputy, Dieter Wislicny, the testimony recorded in June 1946. According to Wislicny, soon after meeting with Hitler, Eichmann was informed of the plan, or al-Husseini was informed of the plan concerning the final solution of the Jewish question in Europe. Wislicny says the Mufti repeatedly suggested to various authorities with whom he was maintaining contact, above all to Hitler, Ribbentrop, and Himmler, that the Jews should be exterminated. He considered this as a comfortable solution to the Palestinian problem. Now, two scholars who have worked on this, studied this, David Dahlin and John Rothman, have shown that of all the major Nazi leaders, Heinrich Himmler was the one with whom al-Husseini had the most frequent and most regular contact. One of the common goals shared by al-Husseini and Himmler, al-Husseini and Himmler was the architect, who was the architect of the final solution, was of course the extermination of the Jews. And al-Husseini had contact with various commandants of various camps. He knew Rudolf Höss, commandant of Auschwitz, Mauthausen commandant Franz Zielris, Siegfried Seidel, commandant of Theresienstadt, and Belsen, commandant Josef Kramer, who was known as the Beast of Belsen. As al-Husseini set up now his base of operations in Berlin, he had access to 6 radio stations for broadcasting Arabic language propaganda to, across North Africa and into the Middle East. In December 1942, he issued a summons to all Arabs, calling them to martyrdom as allies with Germany in the war against English and the Jews. In these regular broadcasts, what you see is not just a political measure taken to ally the Arabs politically or militarily or strategically with the Nazis, but you see it as a summons to a religious duty. One of the refrains in al-Husseini's broadcast was that the spilled blood of the Jews pleases Allah. In addition to being a man of hateful words, al-Husseini was a man of murderous actions. As early as January 1941, he had moved among the Muslims in the Balkans to encourage them and recruit them for serving in SS and other units for the Nazis, for Germany. David Dolan and John Rothman claim that he recruited as many as 100,000 Muslims to serve in Nazi forces, and particularly to serve in the SS. So there were, SS killing units were formed that consisted primarily of Muslims. The most infamous of those killing units was the 13th Handschar Division, which consisted of more than 21,000 men. These Muslim killing units had their religious leaders who themselves were trained personally by al-Husseini. In fact, he set up a school in Dresden for that purpose. The commander of the Handschar, Carl Gustav Zauberzweig, claimed that the Muslims recruits were adopting the Nazi outlook and the Nazi methods quite readily and quite easily, and that they and civilians were he says, quote, beginning to see in our Führer the mission of a second prophet, the one who is following Muhammad. Interestingly, the Nazis had considered a propaganda campaign aimed at the Muslims of Iran, trying to convince them that Hitler was the 12th Imam, but they decided that might not fly. Nevertheless, al-Husseini claimed that Hitler was not only sympathetic to the Muslims, but that he was actually a closet Muslim himself. As I mentioned, when the war came to an end, al-Husseini turned up in Cairo in June of 1946. He was met with a hero's welcome. He had meetings with Hassan al-Banna and Sayyid Qutb. Sayyid Qutb would become the most widely read and most influential of the jihadist ideologues in the Middle East. Jeffrey Herf, another scholar on these matters, writes that Husseini was continuing the same struggle that Hitler in Germany and Husseini himself had been waging during the war. In 1946, al-Husseini invited the grandson of his first cousin, Yasser Arafat, to come to Egypt, where al-Husseini connected Arafat with the Muslim Brotherhood and saw to the military training of Arafat under the leadership of the Muslim Brotherhood. Al-Husseini recruited a former Nazi officer to personally oversee the training of Arafat. Of course, in 1948, as you might imagine, with the War of Independence, after May 14th, 1948, Israel's Declaration of Independence, and the declaration of war on Israel by the surrounding Arab nations, al-Husseini added his voice to that cause, not only to defeat or destroy the Jewish state, but to exterminate the Jews. Reaffirming, continuing what he had always been doing with the Nazis. Now, these developments with Haj Amin al-Husseini and the Muslim Brotherhood take place within a context. I mean, Islamic jihadism doesn't come out of nowhere, and it continues past the Second World War, and that's something I want to consider now: the context and the continuation. Like the Nazis, the jihadists deem the Jews as inherently, essentially, and unredeemably evil, thus placing them in a metaphysical category and removing from the Jews the traditional option for conversion to Islam. I've used the term Nazi anti-Semitism in the title of this lecture, and here we see what is it that makes it Nazi anti-Semitism? It's this essentialist, that is to say, pertaining to the essence of the Jew, this essentialist anti-Semitism, and exterminationist. The Jew can't be changed, can't be converted, can't be assimilated, has to be exterminated. Now, the hatred of the Jews is something that you see in the Arab world, not just among the jihadists. And I mean, in the 1930s, it's in the Arab press. It's in the Arab press today. What you see in the Arab press in the 1930s is not only a hatred of the Jews, but an adoration of the Nazis. Arab overtures to the Nazis throughout the 1930s were more frequent than the Nazi overtures to the Arabs. It was from the Arab world that the Nazis received their first congratulations in 1933 when they came to power. Students from Arab countries received scholarships at German universities. They sent delegations to Nuremberg rallies in Nazi Germany. Arab party leaders, political leaders, were invited to Nazi Germany. Many of them met with military representatives in Nazi Germany. Other journalists in the region, in the Middle East, would report things like, the British being greeted with shouts of Heil Hitler in Nablus, for example. The American journalist, John Gunther, reported that the greatest contemporary Arab hero was probably Hitler. There was a song or a jingle running through that region during the 30s that said, no more Mr., no more Monsieur, in heaven Allah. No, wait, no more Monsieur, no more Mr., in heaven Allah, on earth Hitler. So it's the association with the Nazis had come into the popular culture, and this is the context for the rise of the Brotherhood and the rise of Haj Amin al-Husseini. Now, the seeds planted in those years continued to grow in the post-war years. In 1969, for example, the PLO recruited two former Nazis, Erich Altern, who was the leader of the Gestapo's Jewish Affairs section, and Willy Brenner, who served as an SS officer in Mauthausen. Another former Nazi, Johann Schuler, supplied arms to Fatah, the military or terrorist wing of the PLO. The Belgian Nazi, Jean Tirole, who was a neo-Nazi, was also on the Fatah payroll. Another Belgian neo-Nazi, Karl van der Put, recruited volunteers for the PLO. Of course, in the Arab world, you see this influence continuing. For example, in 1982, Dr. Yahya al-Rahawi, he published an article in the Egyptian newspaper Al-Akhrar, in which he invokes that great man Hitler. May God have mercy on him. The man who was the wisest of those who confronted the problem of the Jews, and who, out of compassion for humanity, tried to exterminate every Jew. He goes on to argue that the Ayatollah Khomeini is the best one suited to deal with the problem, the Jewish problem, in 1982. He said, defeat in this battle, failure to exorcise the Jewish cancer from the body of humanity, could lead to the destruction of humanity itself. So this is not, the problem of Israel, the Israeli state, the Jewish state, Palestine. It's a problem facing all of humanity from this point of view. In an article a few months later, another scholar, Dr. Lufti Abd al-Azim, also wrote in the Egyptian newspaper Al-Ahram the following. He says, the first thing we have to make clear is that no distinction must be made between the Jew and the Israeli. The Jew is a Jew through millennia, in spurning all moral values, devouring the living and drinking the blood for the sake of a few coins. The one reservation you find in the Arab press regarding Hitler is that he didn't go far enough. I mean, you have articles in the Arab press to that effect appearing in 2001 by Ahmed Ragab. In 2002, the Egyptian journalist Fatma Abdullah Mahmoud declared in Al-Akhbar the following. He said, I personally complain to you, Hitler, if only you had done it, brother, if only it had really happened so that the world could sigh in relief without their evil and their sin. Now, there's a curious phenomenon in this world. I mean, you see it in figures like Aziz Rantisi and Ismail Haniyeh of Hamas, that you see the simultaneous adoration of Hitler and denial of the Holocaust. It didn't happen, but we love Hitler for doing it. Or if it happened, I mean, this is a book by Mahmoud Abbas called The Other Side. If it happened, the Jews did it. Okay, so what makes this, what otherwise appears inconsistent, consistent is precisely anti-Semitism. So the jihadist anti-Semites here learn very well their lessons from Hitler. They learn, the lessons of propaganda. They learn that something of the, as Hitler said, something of the most insolent lie will always stick. And you see this in the modern propaganda throughout the Arab world. The claim, the blood libel, for example, the claim that Jews slaughter children to drink their blood. You can see on YouTube a dramatization, television dramatization produced in Syria of a blood libel. But it's not something that comes just from the uneducated. At a UN seminar on religious tolerance, the Saudi representative, Dr. Marwouf al-Dawalibi, stated that if a Jew does not drink every year the blood of a non-Jewish man, he will be damned for all eternity. Mustafa Tlass, the former defense minister of Syria, wrote a book called The Matzah of Zion, in which he makes the case for the blood libel. Other accusations of the Jews are made. Bernard Lewis points out some found in Egypt. Jews are accused of supplying Egyptian women with hyper-aphrodisiac chewing gum, which drives them into a frenzy of sexual desire. They are accused of spreading cancer among Egyptians and other Arabs by disseminating carcinogenic cucumbers and shampoo. They promote drug taking, devil worship. They are organizing campaigns to promote homosexuality, to undermine Arab society, and so on. In other words, the Jews are behind every evil. I mean, the Jewish rule over the world is the rule of evil over the world. It's not just that everything Jewish is evil, but everything evil is Jewish. So you have this Manichaean division between good and evil. And therefore, just as Satan has to be defeated ultimately to achieve the final redemption, so does the Jew have to be defeated ultimately to achieve the final redemption. It becomes a religious duty. So you see the problem in education. in Arab lands, in schools. You have a situation in which you can't teach your children to tolerate the Jew any more than you can teach your children to tolerate the devil. How do you do that? You can't do that. That's the problem. In fact, there's a hadith, the Al-Bukhari hadith says that in the last days, the rocks and the trees will cry out to the Muslims, "Oh, Abdullah, there's a Jew hiding behind me, come kill him." So that nature itself will vomit up the Jews. The Jews are, such an evil. And you have figures, scholars in the Muslim world, saying that the Jews are behind every evil. They are behind the French Revolution, both world wars. They control the world's media, the world's economy. They endeavor to destroy morality, and very often you see the Jews accused of being behind all the brothels of the world. Very often, the proof text for the accusations, such as these, is the Protocols of the Elders of Zion. This is something that the Grand Sheikh of Al-Aqsa University has claimed, the Muhammad Sayyid Tantawi, in his doctoral dissertation. You see the same ideas in a book called Muslims and Globalization, written by Muhammad Qutb, the brother Sayyid Qutb, who would go on to become the teacher of Osama bin Laden at King Abdulaziz University in Jeddah from 1974 to 1978. So you see Osama bin Laden has his Muslim Brotherhood connection as well. In Article 22 of the Hamas Charter, which is called, the Hamas Charter is called the Charter of Allah. So you see the Hamas is Allah. Article 22 says the following: the Jews were behind the French Revolution, the Communist Revolution, and most revolutions we hear about. With their money, they formed secret societies such as Freemasons, Rotary clubs, and Lions clubs, and others in different parts of the world for the purpose of sabotaging societies and achieving Zionist interests. With their money, they were able to control imperialist countries and instigate them to colonize many countries in order to enable them to exploit the resources and spread corruption. And of course, end of quote. And of course, the proof says Article 22 in the Hamas Charter is the Protocols of the Elders of Zion. Now you see here the ramifications of Hitler's description of the Jews as invisible wire pullers. The Jews are as invisible as Satan, and just as ubiquitous. They are invisible and they are everywhere. Even when they're absent. There are no Jews here. I never met a Jew, but I know the Jew. I know Satan. And the solution to the Jewish problem, therefore, has to be just as ubiquitous. And the only way it can be ubiquitous is for, in this case, Islamic jihadism to rule the world. It was pointed out that totalitarianism and anti-Semitism always go together, and there's a reason for that. There's a reason for that. The solution to the Jewish problem, however you understand the Jewish problem, has to be total, and therefore totalitarian. And this is why Zionism is viewed not as a movement to establish a haven for Jews fleeing for their lives from the pogroms of Europe, which is what it was, but rather as a movement to set up a base of operations for ruling the world. And this goes back to as early as 1921, when Alfred Rosenberg, one of the main Nazi ideologues, wrote a book called Der Staatsfeindliche Zionismus, that is Zionism, the enemy of the state, in which he says that Zionism has got nothing to do with haven or homeland. It's about base of operation. In Mein Kampf, Hitler says that it was during his years in Vienna, before the First World War, that he discovered the evil of the Jews in the Zionists. Hitler writes the following in Mein Kampf: while the Zionists try to make the rest of the world believe that the national consciousness of the Jew finds its satisfaction in the creation of a Palestinian state, the Jews again slyly dupe the dumb Goyim. It doesn't even enter their heads to build up a state in Palestine for the purpose of living there. All they want is a central organization for their international world swindle. Therefore, says the Fuhrer, the Jewish state is completely unlimited as to territory. Said Qutb makes similar statements about the Jewish state as being only a small part of a world Zionist conspiracy. And as I said, Qutb's writings are probably the most widely read in the jihadist world. So this is not about Palestine. Islamic jihadist Jew hatred is not about Israeli-Palestinian conflict. The Jewish state is not hated because of the conflict, it's hated because it's Jewish. This is confirmed by many examples, one of which is a broadcast, television broadcast on the Egyptian Al-Rahma television station, January 17, 2009, by the Salafist Sheikh Muhammad Hussein Yaqub. Sheikh Yaqub says the following. He says, if the Jews left Palestine to us, would we start loving them? Of course not. The Jews are infidels, not because I say so, but because Allah says they are infidels. They are the enemies, not because they occupy Palestine. They would have been enemies if they did not occupy a thing. Our fighting with the Jews is eternal, until not a single Jew remains on the face of the earth. And this Sheikh Yaqub utters in the name of God. Now, just some concluding remarks. Let me finish up here. In February of 2006, Hamas produced a video of a homicide bomber's final testimony to the world. In that video, he stated the following. He says, my message to the loathed Jews is that there is no God but Allah, and we will chase you everywhere. We are a nation that drinks blood, and we know there is no blood better than the blood of Jews. We will not leave you alone until we have quenched our thirst with your blood and our children's thirst with your blood. End of quote. Now this episode, this video, brings to mind a rabbinic interpretation of Amalek, the name of the tribe that attacked the Israelites, the children and the elderly, trailing behind the Israelites as they came out of Egypt. Amalek, say the rabbis, means amlak, a people who licks blood. Whether they lick their blood or dip their hands into it, as in the case of the Muslims who butchered Yossi Avrahami and Vadim Yoretz in Ramallah in 2000, the jihadists thrive on the blood of the Jews. Honoring the words of Haj Amina Husseini, their spilled blood pleases Allah. They not only legitimize spilling Jewish blood, they sanctify it, making it a holy act pleasing to God. Robert Wistrich sums up this parallel that I've discussed throughout my remarks today. Robert Wistrich says, the following. Their Bible, the jihadists, their Bible may be the Quran and not Mein Kampf, but the mental structures and worldview behind their actions have striking analogies with German National Socialism. The Muslim fundamentalists, like the Nazis before and during the Shoah, rant against the anonymous powers of globalization and the plutocratic West. Like their totalitarian predecessors, they falsely claim to speak for frustrated, underprivileged, and impoverished masses betrayed by more traditional Arab and Muslim ruling elites. Anti-Semitic conspiracy theories lie at the very heart of the Muslim fundamentalist and Arab nationalist world today. Linking together plutocratic finance, international Freemasonry, secularism, Zionism, and communism as dark occult forces led by the giant octopus of international Jewry, this mythical structure of thought is in many ways virtually identical with Nazi anti-Semitism. Now, if the jihadist Bible is the Quran and not Mein Kampf, then in a certain way, the jihadist evil transcends the Nazi evil inasmuch as Quran is scripture. It's a revelation from God and not the pronouncements of the Führer, no matter how godlike he might be. Now here's the subtle difference between the two. Eclipsing God. The Nazis eclipsed the absolute obligation imposed from beyond so that the inner will and imagination from within posed the only limits to their actions. So what they did was not unimaginable, but everything imaginable. By contrast, rather than eclipsing God, the jihadists appropriate God. They appropriate the authority to impose from beyond what they have determined to be the will of Allah, which is not a matter of human will, but an absolute obligation. And so you have this nuanced difference between how this evil that defined the Holocaust and how it seeks to bring about another Holocaust now. Elie Wiesel once said that Hitler was the only one who kept all of his promises to the Jews. My own personal fear is that in the future, it may be the jihadists who are the only ones to keep their promises to the Jews. Thank you for your attention. Thank you.
Muchas gracias, profesor Patterson. Extremadamente interesante su conferencia sobre los orígenes del nacionalismo árabe y palestino y su confluencia con la ideología de los hermanos musulmanes y, cómo no, cómo esta ideología ha traspasado las fronteras y hoy es representada por el yihadismo. Entonces, voy a pasar la palabra a Xavier, que moderará el coloquio a continuación. Muchísimas gracias.
Bueno, com a pauta general, cada any ho repetim, diguem-ne, en tot el seminari, ara us demanem preguntes que siguin breus i sobretot concises, perquè així doncs, podem fer més diversitat i multitud de preguntes en aquest temps que tenim per preguntar al ponent. El màxim respecte també als ponents i a totes les persones quan es formulin les preguntes i es facin les intervencions. I bé, aprofito jo mateix per fer una primera pregunta al professor Patterson. Jo al llarg de la meva vida m'he trobat amb persones que... Diguem-ne que en el camp de l'antisemitisme trobem persones en diferents graus i nivells del prejudici antisemita, trobem persones de diferents ideologies que tenen el prejudici antisemita. Generalment el problema és que persones més conservadores o de dretes pensen que l'antisemitisme només està a l'esquerra, persones d'esquerres pensen que només l'antisemitisme està a la dreta o a l'extrema dreta, però la gent que analitzem aquest prejudici sabem que estan en totes les ideologies polítiques. Succeeix el mateix amb persones de diferents creences religioses, és a dir, hi ha persones cristianes que pensen que l'antisemitisme només està en l'islamisme, persones jueves que pensen que l'antisemitisme només està en el cristianisme i de fet hi ha inclús persones jueves que de fet també són antisemites, encara que siguin jueves. És com dones que són sexistes, és a dir, la mateixa confluència del prejudici. Tenint en compte això, de totes maneres és cert que avui en dia, segle XXI, possiblement l'únic antisemitisme que és exterminador, és a dir, l'únic antisemitisme que posa en perill les vides, literalment les vides jueves, és a dir, per la qual cosa cal mantenir seguretat i cal mantenir temes de policia en relació a sinagogues, en relació a escoles jueves, en relació a aquest mateix seminari, és l'islamisme gihadista i encara a part del que seria la tradicional extrema dreta. Com bé ha dit el professor Patterson, aquí hi ha un problema metafísic. Jo ara estic dirigint una tesi doctoral que justament intenta analitzar l'aspecte metafísic d'aquest prejudici antisemita. Tot el mal és jueu i tot jueu és el mal. Aquest problema metafísic és irresoluble. M'agradaria si pot incidir una mica més en aquest aspecte.
Thank you. It's impossible to resolve once the Jew is placed in that category. You can't negotiate with Satan. The elimination of the Jew is non-negotiable because it's essential to salvation. Now, it's essential to maintaining a certain ideology, a certain worldview. You can't allow the Jew to be a Jew. Now, in the past, the Jews have been allowed the option of conversion in the light of this metaphysical category, because the Jews have a soul. The Jews have a human soul, and if a human being has the path to salvation open to him, whether it's through whatever other religious tradition there might be. In more modern times, with the advent of the Enlightenment, the path open to the Jew was assimilation. But there too, you do have the anti-Semitism taking on a metaphysical aspect in as much as Hegel, for example, associates the Jews with a slave mentality. Immanuel Kant calls for the euthanasia of Judaism. The leading socialist thinkers of the 19th century all saw the Jews as problematic, but most of them, not all of them, but most of them still left open the door of assimilation, because Jews are human beings, and human beings are capable of rational thought. So instead of redemption, it's now reason. This is still in the realm of metaphysics, in that the Jew is shaping the categories of thought. With the advent of the Nazis, whose influence are among what I call the essentialist races, that is, the races who see the Jewish character in the Jewish blood, so that they can't be assimilated, they can't be converted. The only option left is extermination. The jihadists depart from traditional Islam in this respect. I mean, traditional Islam has always left conversion open to the Jews. Even forced, maybe forced conversion. Okay, but there's still an option. If you read Sayyid Qutb's essay. It's a long essay called Our Struggle with the Jews, published in 1953, widely read in the Muslim world. There you see, the Jew is precisely the devil. With the Nazis, the Jew is not a human. The policy toward the Jews was not racist, in that the Jews are not part of human races. They are the corruptors of all the races, right? So, I don't see any way to convert the jihadist or convert the Nazi, maybe with a few exceptions. The best hope is for that to come from within. I mean, it was mentioned today that we would like to see some of the moderate Muslims step up and call out their brother Muslims, their fellow Muslims, brother and sister Muslims. So that's going to have to come from within. It can't come from negotiation or even dialogue, I'm afraid. But when I'm asked, is there any hope? My usual answer is, even if I think there's no hope, I have to talk and act as if there were hope. Otherwise, there is no hope. So I try to talk and act like there is hope. Yeah.
Preguntes?
Profesor, antes que nada, felicitar por sus palabras. Mi nombre es Juan Zapato, soy escritor israelí. Justamente sobre su ensayo, sobre su trabajo, tenemos como este hilo conductor entre el nazismo y la yihad, que no es algo nuevo, pero se empieza a ver recientemente. Hitler llega al poder a través de el voto, a través de la democracia. Y en esto, que desde lo lejos veo que permite la libertad que se ha conseguido en Europa y la expresión, por un cálculo, por un lado tenemos la yihad desde la posición violenta, de la conquista del poder, por así decirlo, y por otro lado, en Europa, la vía democrática, sin violencia, permite que justamente, o permitiría, o permitirá en el futuro, que una masa que va creciendo día a día tenga la posibilidad de llegar al poder. Y es comparativo, ¿no?, con lo que la historia ya ha demostrado. Bueno, es eso, su palabra. Gracias.
Is there a question? That's an excellent observation. You have good reason to be worried. Yes, it was pointed out, that the Nazis didn't have a coup to overthrow a government. There was no government overthrow, right? At least not by any violent means. They work the system. And the jihadists are extremely sophisticated. They are not stupid. They're extremely intelligent. They're highly educated. Ayman al-Zawahiri, Hassan Nasrallah, the Ayatollah Khamenei, Ismail Haniyeh, Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi, these guys are all highly educated, very intelligent. They know how to work the system. It's been pointed out that Hamas was elected, but this is not the same thing. Hamas is elected in a climate that they're already at home in. They don't have to work the system, right? In Europe, in North America, and elsewhere, where there are democratic societies and growing jihadist presence. I'd say jihadist is distinct from larger Muslim communities, but there is a growing jihadist presence, And they know how to, they know how to work the system, and they will work the system, you can be sure. In the United States, I do see hope here. In the United States, there are more than 500 officially recognized Christian denominations. The United States has a history of religious tolerance and welcoming religious variety into the society. So I see among my own students in the university, which is admittedly a special population, but many Muslims. I have Muslims taking courses on the Holocaust, on Israel, anti-Semitism, engaged with it. I have an Egyptian Muslim student doing a dissertation on the Holocaust, young woman. She's the second Muslim I've had to do a dissertation on the Holocaust. Of course, I have to add that they don't want this to be known in the countries where they come from, right? They can't go back home and have this be known that their doctorate degree is focusing on the Holocaust. This is a reality. But within the context of American society, there's I would say among the Muslim communities, there's as much integration into American society than, even more of that than Muslims or jihadists trying to find ways to work the system, although I imagine that's present as well.
Altra pregunta? Algú més té alguna qüestió per preguntar sobre el vincle entre dos tipus, en aquest cas, d'antisemitisme, l'antisemitisme nazi i l'antisemitisme gihadista?
Me gustaría saber qué opinión tiene de las declaraciones que hizo Bibi Netanyahu a propósito del mufti y el nazismo. Porque siendo usted un especialista, pues quizá es la persona adecuada, después de todo lo que hemos leído, en contra y a favor. Gracias.
Thank you. I was wondering when that would be asked. Yes, Netanyahu's remarks about the Mufti were only slightly off, if I got them correct. You can't always rely on the accuracy of what's reported, right? What's reported is not always accurate. But as I understand it, it sounded as if Netanyahu was saying that the Mufti was behind the extermination operation. Eichmann's deputy, Dietrich Wislitzny, made similar comments. So I'm sure Netanyahu's getting this from war crimes trial testimony. But I think Wislitzny's comments were made to make the Germans look better. Hitler, Himmler, Goebbels, these guys needed no encouragement from the Mufti to exterminate the Jews. By the time the Mufti met with Hitler in November of 1941, the extermination operation was well along in its planning. And in fact, it had gone into operation the previous June 22nd, 1941. The killing units were already operating in Eastern Europe when the Mufti had his first meeting with Hitler. So, the Mufti did not cause it, but he cheered it, he encouraged it. He tried to spur it on to go faster. Like Eichmann, with whom the Mufti was very close. As the war turned against the Germans. He wanted to speed up the operation. Eichmann and the Mufti were afraid that the Germans would lose the war before they could kill the Jews. So, I mean, you know, Netanyahu, he may have been, you know, slightly off, but only slightly. And I think, frankly, maybe a little too much was made of it. I mean, there are more important things to address right now than whether the Mufti or Hitler or both of them were behind the Holocaust. I mean, historical accuracy is important as far as we can have it. That shouldn't be underestimated. But right now, there are other more urgent matters to deal with in the Middle East, I think.
Una altra pregunta aquí.
Muy buenas, señores. Tengo una pregunta. Hay mucho sensacionalismo en lo que le llamamos los medios de comunicación, sobre todo cuando se habla de los judíos, cuando se habla de algún evento que ha pasado en Israel, y lo primero que enseñan son esas criaturas que mueren por mano de los judíos, y siempre fomentan ese odio a los judíos cuando hay cosas mucho peores en los mismos países árabes, y esto no lo dan a conocer para que siempre sea, como dijo el Señor, que el judío es el malo. ¿Por qué no hay una organización que procura o hace lo posible para que este sensacionalismo no sea tan radical? Y que aquí en España, sobre todo en Barcelona, en Cataluña, que cuando haya un evento que sea una cosa que siempre es el judío culpable, que haga lo posible por investigarlo y ser neutral. Y eso yo le pido, por favor, que me diga el por qué siempre hay una especie de odio, sobre todo por los medios de comunicación. Gracias.
That's another good question. You know, it's interesting that, you know, if the claim of the anti-Semites is correct, namely that the Jews control the media, that there's so much Jew hatred in many quarters of the media. It's not throughout the media, but it's certainly there. It's there more by omission. You know, the media overlook Sudan, for example, and concentrate on Gaza. They'll overlook Tibet and concentrate on Gaza. You know, they'll overlook largely what's happened with the Yazidi, but they'll concentrate on Gaza. There are organizations who try to correct that, or at least add additional and other perspectives and views. One is called Palestine Media Watch. Another is MEMRI, Middle East Media Research Institute. Another organization called Honest Reporting, and all of these have websites, of course. You can find it. I mean, you can find, you know, other perspectives, and I think often more accurate perspectives on the internet, but you have to hunt for it. If you turn on your television, you won't see it. You have to look for it. You have to research it. You have to make an effort to do that. But, you know, there are organizations that exist to address the very matter that you raise.
Una darrera pregunta. A dalt de tot.
Buenos días.
morning.
Yo quisiera saber, desde su punto de vista, cómo podríamos las personas, o sea, qué debemos hacer para contribuir a parar esto, a acabar con esto. ¿Qué podríamos hacer de manera unilateral y a nivel también de nación? Pregunto. Gracias.
That's a very good question. It's a question that comes up, you know, in every gathering such as this. one of the things that can be done is to name the evil. Where I live, one has to be very careful about how one speaks about Muslims or jihad or Islamism, or jihadism. Our president insists that ISIS is not Islamic. The Islamic State is not Islamic. The current administration won't use the term terrorism. They won't use the term jihadism. Now, if you don't name it, you can't see it. And you can't do anything about it if you can't see it, right? So this requires courage. Let me say further, I've been involved in at least 2 book projects and public, discourses in interfaith relations among Christians, Jews, and Muslims. And I find that my Muslim colleagues have an extraordinary amount of courage. Now, it requires courage to speak the truth. But my Muslim colleagues generally often require a little more courage because they take a greater risk from their own co-religionists. I've seen this in Israel. I had a meeting with Israeli and Palestinian teachers who were trying to find ways to teach tolerance in the classroom. The Israeli teachers were perfectly free to sit down. We were in Jerusalem. They had no fear. The Palestinian teachers were afraid. They took a great risk just to be talking to Israeli teachers. So we have to talk to each other as much as possible. What can be done? Talk. Let's talk to each other. Find the courage to speak the truth. When we see Muslims in the Muslim community speak up, as Mr. Karoub suggested and others have suggested here, we have to give them our support and our encouragement. We have to let them know they're not alone. They have somewhere to turn. So just as anti-Semitism affects the entire community, what happens to humanity happens to the Jews first. So does fighting it bring in the entire community. Not just the Jews, but the Jews have to support those voices that find the courage to say something, and it's a scary thing to do. You'd be surprised at how afraid people are of being viewed negatively. Never mind being the violence. People are afraid to have others think badly of them. It's very true in academia. Those of us who have senior positions in academia, who have tenure, so to say, have a greater responsibility than our younger colleagues, whose careers are at risk if they try to speak out. So ultimately, this is the answer. And I'll end with this. Jews are hated because the Jews insist to the world that every human being is chosen and every human being is asked the first question put to the first human being, namely, where are you? Most of us, like the first human being, hide from that question because it implicates us. We're afraid. We don't want to hear it. The Jewish people, by their presence in the world, signify that outcry from above and from our fellow human beings. And harbored within that question are the 2 questions put to the firstborn of Adam, put to Cain, namely, where's your brother and what have you done? Thank you.
Muchas gracias. Thank you so much.